Welcome to Nebraska Game and Parks Commission's YouTube Live Big Game Meeting. I'm Pat Malini, Assistant Division Administrator in the Wildlife Division, and next to me is Luke Meduna, our Big Game Program Manager. And we're going to talk to you a couple hours here about big game management in Nebraska. We're going to start off showing you some slides, a little presentation here on big game management. Big Game 101 we call it, and then Luke will have some slides on some of the most common questions we get about big game management. There should be an opportunity on your screen if you have a YouTube account to ask questions, or you can get a hold of us through Facebook or our website, outdoornebraska.org, to submit questions while we're here tonight. So with that, we'll get started. So big game in Nebraska, this comes from our strategic plans, our long-term management plans for the agency. Big game management goal to manage big game populations at levels consistent with social and biological carrying capacities and provide opportunities for aesthetic enjoyment in hunting. So input to big game management in Nebraska comes from four primary sources. Our landowners through meetings and surveys, and that's just examples. We also get phone calls and have a lot of conversations with landowners and hunters, and also the general public. Anyone out there, all 1.8 million people in Nebraska have a say in big game management, whether it's negatively impacting you as far as deer vehicle accidents, or just want to enjoy taking pictures of wildlife and that sort of thing. And then the biology of the critters, we look at age structure of bucks and bulls and buck-doe ratios. We do some fawn calf production and research, and then we consider disease and parasites. And so, and this is just a kind of a pie chart, and these aren't, the pies probably aren't the right size, but this shows you how many different things we consider, how many not special interests, but interest groups we have within the hunting community, and this includes landowners. But as you can see, we got rifle hunters, youth hunters, residents, non-residents, trophy hunters, meat hunters, landowner interests, and et cetera, et cetera. So there's just a lot of people that care about big game hunting in Nebraska. And then another slide similar to that, and we've got some of the biological considerations here. Buck only, population surveys, antlerless tags, and then of course the ones highlighted in yellow are ones that we don't have a lot of control over. Weather, flooding is a good example, like this year we had in March. And a couple of slides here on some of the more prominent diseases we deal with in Nebraska and a lot of other states. But chronic wasting disease, CWD, it's a prion disease. It attacks the brain of infected animals. It's 100% fatal to infected animals. And it was first found in Nebraska in Kimball County in 2000. And we've tested over 55,000 deer since 1997, and currently confirmed in 43 counties. And we rotate our testing around the state annually. Another disease we deal with periodically. In 2012, there was quite an outbreak of EHD, or episodic hemorrhagic disease. It's a viral disease, and it's transmitted by biting midges, and it often is prevalent in hot and dry conditions, August, September, those months of the year, drought conditions, and like in 2012, we had the perfect storm and had quite an outbreak. And usually with the first hard frost puts an end to that disease. And as you can see, this is just a slide of years past, some of the reported EHD mortalities, and 2012 stands out with quite an outbreak. And a lot of places it took a number of years to recover from that event. Another disease that our mule deer battle with, meningeal brain worm. It's a nematode. Whitetails can get it, but it's fatal to mule deer. And it really has caused some issues in mule deer populations. So and it's likely the primary cause of mule deer population decreases. And roadkill information, this is just kind of a graph that shows us how we compare to other states, and you might not be able to see it real well, but you know, some of the states over there, Pennsylvania, Michigan, New York, North Carolina, Texas, Virginia, some of those states kill more deer with vehicles than we do during our hunting seasons. So we're somewhere in the 5,000 to 8,000 range annually. So we all have responsibilities, game and parks, hunters, landowners, and the game and parks responsibility in big game management is to develop permits and seasons to successfully manage the herd and provide regulation and policy to assist landowners in controlling big game damage. Encourage hunters to harvest antlerless big game where needed, and to recruit, inform, and communicate with hunters. And then landowners have some responsibilities in big game management. Estimate the big game population on your property, and if the population is too high, increase antlerless harvest, and give it. And that involves giving access to hunters who will harvest antlerless big game. And if you lease your property to hunters, require that they have an antlerless quota. And then work with your neighbors in achieving common big game management goals. And then hunters have responsibilities in big game management. Work with the landowner to manage big game numbers and quality. Hunt ethically and responsibly. Harvest antlerless if population reduction is desired by the landowner. Donate surplus deer through our deer exchange, or Hunters Helping the Hungry. And mentor and recruit new hunters. Nebraska Game and Parks Commission's damage policy, big game damage policy is hunting is our preferred method of controlling big game species and the damage they can cause. But we do have fencing, cost share, habitat modifications, scare devices, some of those things. And we do offer no fee depredation permits, and some of the rules. Landowners must allow reasonable harvests, and normally we issue these outside of the normal deer seasons. Again, deer hunting is the preferred method, and really the method that does work to control big game populations in Nebraska. And shooters must be approved by the Game and Parks Commission, and carcasses must be offered for human consumption. And here's some guiding documents, laws, if you will, that and how they're set up in Nebraska. We have state statutes set by the state legislature, and it establishes the commission as the responsible body for big game and wildlife management. And then we have regulations which are approved by our Board of Commissioners and must be approved by the governor. And then we have commission orders, which are also approved by our Board of Commission. And this are most of the details of dates and quotas on an annual basis. And so I wanted to point one more thing out, you know, all these questions and comments that we get tonight, and we've had already 8 meetings this year, and we've been giving these big game programs for about 12 years now. All these questions and comments go to our administrators and to our Board of Commissioners. They'll see all these questions and comments. So with that, I'm going to have Luke. His presentation again is going to be about a lot of common questions we get annually and quite often.
Yeah, we'll start out with deer season. I guess first we'll just remind you, if you've got any questions or comments, go ahead and comment below or back on the Facebook posts. Those links there, we'll try to follow that as the night goes along and address those. And like Pat said, every one of those comments and questions will get recorded and forwarded on. First thing with our deer season that we had here in 2019, our whitetail buck harvest was up 10%, whitetail antlerless harvest down just a little bit. Mule deer buck down about 7.5%, and mule deer antlerless up 2%. And this data is about the 21st, I think, is when we downloaded it. So in both Loop East and Frenchman West, we've still got a little bit of time to go. On the graph there, you can see how we compared to years past. We've been pretty stable for the most part here over the last 5 or 6 years. slight increase in mule deer doe harvest as those populations have come up. So that's led to an increase in harvest. Looking at deer season with our buck age structure, again, we're really pretty good on our whitetails. 77% of our harvest was age 2 or older. We met our goal of 75% in 14 of our 18 units. And I guess those 4 units that we didn't meet that, those were all in the low 30s. Those are the 4 eastern units. And then for, let's see, mule deer, we had 89% of our bucks were aged 2 or older. That goal as well is 75%. We met that in all of our mule deer units. We get a lot of questions about how do we know what that age is, or how confident are we? This last year we killed, roughly 29,000 whitetails. We aged 12,000 of those whitetail bucks. Mule deer bucks, it was about 45 to 50%. So we're quite confident in that age structure. And all of that's gathered at our check stations when we get to talk to you guys, and we cut the cheek at the deer check during the November firearm season. Looking at our elk season, this past year we issued 122 bull permits and 252 antlerless permits. You can see over time how that has gradually increased. The bull permits have plateaued in that 115 to 120 here over the last few years, and the cow permits have continued to increase. This past year we harvested 108 bulls and 114 antlerless. That's been fluctuating right around it's been fairly stable here, I guess, over the last 4, 5, 6 years. We had 89% success on our bull permits. Our goal on that is 70%. The percent 6x6 was 85%. Our goal is 90% on that, so we were just a little bit short. And then we also take the average age and average main beam length into account, and we reached both of those goals this year. The cow success on our permits was 45%. So not too bad. It's usually in that neck of the woods, 40 to 50% success. One of the questions we've gotten at every meeting and we want to address here today, do you want me to?
Go ahead.
Okay.
Yeah.
Is the damage control permit that we issued out in Western Nebraska for elk. So for a little history, we've used damage control permits on deer pretty liberally down in the eastern part of the state to help us deal with deer damage issues. And a lot of those occur on what we refer to as de facto refuges, where deer are coming off of an area that may not allow enough hunting and neighboring landowners getting a lot of damage. There's a lot of restrictions on those permits. They can't be commercialized in any way. The deer have to be offered for human consumption. All of the shooters that are named on those permits are vetted by our law enforcement, make sure we don't have poachers or people that are questionable on those. So we examine those. We typically put at least one of our staff named as a shooter on any of those damage control permits. The other part of that is that those permits are incremental in number. A lot of times we start out with a low number, 5 or 10. If that landowner fills that permit real quick, comes back, we'll renew it for another 5 or 10. If they did it really quick, we might up it a little more just to be convenient. But what that does is it keeps us in close communication with those landowners as they're executing that permit. Where this one started a little bit is some of you may be aware that there was legislative resolution 142 last legislative session, where it was basically a review of Game and Parks operations, and our depredation program was a part of that review. One of the criticisms that we received at those hearings, there were 2 hearings, one in Scottsbluff, one in McCook, is that we weren't doing enough in the depredation department. And so that was one thing that moving forward, we wanted to make sure that we rectified. At the Scottsbluff hearing, the landowner that received this elk permit testified and demonstrated his elk damage. Those pictures on the screen there are aerial drone footage of his cornfield, and he had very significant damage, not only to the corn, but also he exhibited a lot of damage to his cattle operation with the downed corn, and had to prep his cattle to run on that on those stalks in the winter. And so following those meetings, about 10 days after those meetings, we were notified or we were asked to help remedy that landowner's situation. We were asked to provide immediate assistance. And in that, the kill permit was decided to be used because that is the most immediate to be able to remove the offending animals. I guess to take a step back, at those legislative hearings, we did say that we would use damage control permits on elk and pronghorn more in the future. We had used one for pronghorn a year ago. Was that in January? I think that was January, last January, where we issued 5. It was issued for 5 on that permit, and at those hearings, we were criticized for only issuing 5 and not doing enough. And so when it came to this kill permit on this elk, we already knew that the landowner had significant damage. And when the number 50 came about was because we wanted to make sure that we couldn't be accused of not doing enough. We wanted to make sure that we did enough in this situation. Part of the 50 as well, the landowner had reportedly seen well over 100 elk, or around 100 elk in the area. And so with 50, we knew that if the permit was completely filled, we knew that that elk herd would not be completely wiped out. It would be significantly reduced, but not completely wiped out. We didn't anticipate that the full 50 would be filled. We expected that after a couple days of heavy shooting and heavy disturbance, that the elk would move out. The final results, we ended up killing a total of 8 elk on that permit. The landowner killed 1, our staff killed 8 in basically 2 days of shooting. 1 was killed the first day and 7 the next, and the problem was quickly remedied. Those elk were dispersed off the area, and no more elk were actually killed on that permit. All of the elk were donated and utilized. There were several families in the area. Some of them went to some food pantries in the Scottsbluff area. So that was good. Like I mentioned, that immediate problem was solved. And moving forward, we'll continue to work with this landowner to try to solve this issue and make sure we don't go that route again. Another question we've gotten a lot this year is, why did we change the November firearm season in 2019? The truth is it didn't change. It does this every few years. The order, as you can see there on our screen, is our November firearm season always is set to open the Saturday closest to November 13th. Last year was the 10th. This year it was the 16th. It's made this jump well in 2013, 2008, 2002, 1997, and previous to that as well. This has gone on for decades. It's scheduled to happen again in 2024, and by then everybody will probably forget and accuse us of changing the season again. So everybody's got we all have a little bit of amnesia on that when it's going to come. So I guess be prepared.
It always ends the Sunday before Thanksgiving.
Yes. Yep.
It's the last day.
Yep. Another question we get is a lot on our bonus and preference points and how those systems work. Currently, we have a true preference system for our landowner elk, pronghorn, and deer permits. And the preference system is based upon, for every year that you apply and aren't successful, you gain a point, and the drawing is drawn out of the people with the most points. And as those people draw permits, you graduate to the next level, and so that eventually you can kind of plan when you're going to get your permit. Bonus points are just for our general bull elk. The way that system works, every year that you're not successful, you get a point, and that means your name is in the hat one more time. So this last year, the top pool was with 5 points. So everybody with 5 points had their name in the hat 5 times, or 6 times. Sorry, 6 times. Everybody who was applying for the first time had their name in the hat one time. One of the questions that has kind of popped up with this LB 287, there's an option to allow the purchase of the point only option. And what that is it allows somebody to not have to not risk having to participate in the drawing that year. Like if you know that you've got something going on. If you've got something going on that fall, like this fall, my wife and I actually had a baby, so it wouldn't have been a good year for me to have an elk permit. So it would have been nice to buy be able to purchase that bonus point and not be a part of the drawing. So that's what that allows. It doesn't allow you to purchase more than one. It doesn't allow. This isn't. Sorry, we're having some technical stuff going on. Trying to get that mouse out of the way. So yeah, that legislation sets the max price at $24 and for residents, $72 for non-residents. Commission could decide to set that anywhere below that. Like Pat mentioned, with our statutes, everything we do has a price maximum, so that's got to be set somewhere. It doesn't change the normal application procedures or application fee. You're not going to be charged an extra amount to get your bonus point or preference point if you're not successful. It's only for the option if you want to put in and make sure that you don't draw. It's basically just the fee for that, the convenience of being able to do that. Just to show a little bit of how our elk worked out and some of the issues and why we use a bonus point system in our elk as opposed to a true preference. Last year we had over 4,600 applicants for 78 permits. That comes down to 59 applicants per permit. If we'd go to a true preference system, it would be the end game would be somewhere in the 35 to 40 year range to draw a permit. I did a little bit of the math. This last year, with the applicants we had in the 5-point pool, it would take a total of 7 years to get through all those applicants. Or actually it was 8 years to get through those applicants, 7 years to get through the 0.4, and another 7 to 8 to get through the third pool. And so by there, you're talking 20 years before you ever get to anybody in pool 2, and probably close to 30 years for sure 30 years by the time you get to anybody in pool 0 right now. And so anybody just starting to get into it is definitely going to be pushing in that 30 to 40 year range. And so it's unfortunately our elk herd is not large enough that we can offer enough permits to guarantee that everybody will draw a bull permit. We just simply don't have the habitat to support that large of a number of elk. And as you can see in the graph there, that our drawing actually worked quite well. The actual percent drawing success for those in 0.0 pool was right at about 0.7%. Those in pool 5 was almost exactly 6 times better. So it worked out quite well. Those expected and actual permit distributions were really close. So that system is working exactly as it's designed, and we're happy to see that. We know everybody wants to draw a permit. Unfortunately, there's a lot of people that also want to draw. Looking at antelope works for a true preference system because we've got basically about 7.5 applicants per permit. We've got almost got about the same amount of applicants, but almost 8 to 9 times as many permits to offer. That chart there below shows you the drawing percent success for those permits. So most permits are drawing. Some people are able to draw with 2 points, but most of them are in that 3 to 4 range where they're starting to draw. North Sioux is the toughest one, and that takes basically 5. And then looking at deer, and these are basically just for our 2 MDCA units that draw out Platte and Frenchman. This was the first year that we've had Platte actually draw out. So there's 4% of people that applied that did not draw, unfortunately, this year. I guess one of the questions that pops up are those quotas for the non-residents. If we didn't have those quotas, non-residents would draw approximately 20 to 25% of those permits, just based upon the distribution of the applicants. Where's I going to go with that? Oh, there's something else I was going to talk about. I can't remember now. Oh well, it'll come back to me, and I'll think of it later. But yeah, basically right now with all of our resident permits, everybody, if you didn't draw last year, you're all but guaranteed to draw next year unless something strange happens. Or if you put in with somebody with 0 points. I guess that's one thing that we should mention on all of these, particularly the preference points. If you do a buddy application, they go with the lowest number of points between you and your buddy. So if you're putting in with 5 points and wondering why you're not drawing, it's probably because you're putting in with a buddy that's got far too few. One of the big questions we get is regarding our deer season, is more oriented towards trophy deer management. Like, why do we hunt during the rut? We get comments that we should move to December like Iowa and Kansas, or questions, why do we allow 2 buck permits, or we need antler restrictions? A lot of it comes down to why aren't we like Iowa and Kansas? And if we only did, such and such, move the season or had antler restrictions, we'd have monster bucks running everywhere. It's generally a lot more complicated than that. To start with, we've done some analysis looking at the trophy production. This is the 10-year average, actually 11 years from 2007 to 2017. The annual average of the number of Boone and Crockett entries for whitetails, both typical and non-typical. We're at about 12. Iowa, Kansas, they produce somewhere in the 30s per year. Wisconsin leads us all with a shade over 70. And there's a lot of factors that play into just producing a certain number of Boone and Crockett entries or a single Boone and Crockett buck. This is, this is where we rank with all the Midwestern states. You can see that on that lower part. There's a lot of contributing factors. You have buck harvest, just the sheer number of deer, sheer number of bucks that are getting shot, the number of hunters you have, the hunter density, the habitat, both above ground and below ground. The soil is highly linked to the quality of deer, which produces the quality of browse and all those things. The above ground factor is just hiding cover, escape cover. The culture, there's a lot of places that people are looking to, pass and grow older bucks. And there's a lot of places where people just like to shoot deer and don't care about the trophy size at all. And also season structure does play a role in that. First, we'll look at buck harvest, where we rank with all the states. You can see our numbers, and this 10-year average is from that same 2007 to 2017. I was able to pull a lot of this data from some QDMA stuff. Their annual report is a good source for whitetail information. And I should say that a lot of this, what we're looking at here is all going to be oriented towards whitetails. So yeah, you can see where I've got Nebraska circled in red where we rank. Michigan kills basically 7 times as many whitetail bucks as we do on an annual basis. Wisconsin kills 5 times. Iowa basically kills not quite twice what we do. Kansas about 33% more. So they produce and kill far more deer than we do. The better way to look at that is our harvest density, the deer killed per square mile. And if you look at that, we kill about 0.4 whitetail bucks per square mile. Michigan kills almost 10 times as many bucks per square mile as we do. I can't even imagine what that feels like or what opening day sounds like in that. Iowa, they kill twice as many bucks per square mile. Kansas, another 25% more per square mile. So there's, with all that, there's obviously a lot more deer on the landscape. Total deer hunters plays a role in that. We've got just shy of 100,000 deer hunters. Wisconsin leads that Midwest with Minnesota and Michigan, in that 600,000 ballpark range. 15 to 20 years ago, both Michigan and Pennsylvania had over 1 million deer hunters. Those deer hunters have dwindled. So you compare the number of deer hunters for deer hunter density. Once again, we're pretty low, 1.2 deer hunters per square mile. Pennsylvania is at almost 16. Wisconsin is basically 10 times the number of deer hunters that we have. And again, I can't fathom exactly what that that would feel like to have that many deer hunters that you're out there competing against, I guess, or to share that resource. So we've got it, honestly, really pretty good with the number of deer hunters we have. One of the complaints that we get is the number of deer hunters per for our density or our hunter density on our public lands. And you look at we don't have a whole lot of public land. We're only, we're like 97% privately owned here. But when it comes to comparing a lot of the other states, we really fare quite well in the grand scheme of things. There's some states with well, close ones, South Dakota and North Dakota, they've got a lot of federal land that really bumps their number up. I guess if you go a step back, you can see where we rank. We've got 50% more deer hunters than they do as well. And they've got quite a bit more public land. And so if you start looking at the Boone and Crockett harvest on a per deer harvested basis, or number of whitetail bucks harvested per Boone and Crockett entry, this will make a little more sense. I thought I had that pop up, but you can see South Carolina, it takes about 600,000 bucks harvested per Boone and Crockett entry. I think they had one Boone and Crockett entry for that 11-year period. Alabama, I think, had 2 or 3 total. We'll get rid of those first 8, so you get down to Michigan. It takes about 26,000 bucks harvested, whitetail bucks harvested per entry. We get a little zoom in a little more as we basically get to like the top 13, I think is what that adds up to, or 15, top 15, I think. So we're about 2,500. You can see the numbers there, how we compare to the Midwest. Iowa, Kansas, Indiana, they're all kill Boone and Crockett bucks at about twice the rate we do. We're smack between Wisconsin and Minnesota, which is in reality pretty good company. We don't produce bucks at quite the top end rate, but as you can see from these other graphs, we rank out quite well when you compare all 37 whitetail states. So yeah, we're basically about twice as good as South Dakota. Is that a bragging right? They get more pheasants. We get better deer.
Right. We got better deer. They got better pheasants, I guess. In some places, we got pretty good pheasants in some parts.
But anyway, you can see how that all ranks out. We're really not so bad.
Should mention on a lot of those graphs, you said QDMA provide a lot of this data in their reports. That's Quality Deer Management Association.
Oh, yeah. And I should say that also that the Boone and Crockett data came from Boone and Crockett's Trophy Watch program. It's fascinating. There's a lot of data that they produce. If you're interested in that type of stuff, you can dive into that and have a lot of fun. So the next thing we look at is just deer habitat, looking at the landscape scale. And as you can see on this map, a lot of the green there is forest. It's also light blue is that woody wetlands. It's also going to be deer habitat, and you can just see how that changes across the eastern part of the United States, the primary whitetail range. So and in that, woodland land cover is a major driver in producing deer habitat. You look at where we rank on the percent woodland on a statewide scale. Out of all those states, we're actually dead last at 3.2%. There's a good reason why we started Arbor Day. We're very short on trees to start with, and so I don't imagine that they were exactly looking to produce whitetail habitat back then, but they obviously saw the absence of trees across Nebraska, and this graph, demonstrates that quite well. You can see where Iowa and Kansas rank. well, it's not a lot more. It is, you know, when proportionally you look at it, it's a fair amount more. You start looking at the square miles. In this one, we're actually ahead of North Dakota with the square miles of woodland habitat. And you look at that, Kansas has about half again more than we do. Iowa has twice the woodland tree cover across the landscape that we do. Here's a one where you add the shrub cover in it. That's where Texas gets a lot of their whitetail habitat, because you can see where Texas is on the woodland, but you add the shrub cover, and that's what all that South Texas whitetail habitat is, all that mesquite shrub. Yeah, about the same. It's basically the same effect. This scales it up a bit more when you get Texas out of there. So what does our state look like in land cover? That brown is cropland. The light tan is grassland. You can see the sandhills really stand out. How we look compared to the other states, you can see a lot of Kansas topography. A lot of that yellow is a hay and pasture. It's kind of a managed grass system, whether it's some CRP or some planted grasses. You also see a lot more green pop up, you know, whereas if you move back, you look at we're 3.2% woodland. Yeah, Kansas in there at 4.9%. Here's Iowa 8.3. You can see in this, and we'll dive a little closer detail later, but most of Kansas is great deer. You know, in that south central part of the state, there's a big reason why a lot of the TV shows are filmed in that part of the state. It's prime whitetail habitat, along with that northeastern corridor. And then you look at Wisconsin, where they're almost 50% woodland, a lot of timber. So as you zoom in a little closer, arguably the best trophy county in the nation is Buffalo County, Wisconsin. You can look at that and you can see why whitetails would love it, and how you can get bucks to survive with all of that cover interspersed with ag ground. It's if you could design a place to grow whitetails, it would look a lot like that. Pike County, Illinois, another one that gets a lot of notoriety, looks a lot the same. Still 30% woodland, a little more crop, but again, just prime whitetail habitat. Monroe County, Illinois, or Monroe County, Iowa, south central Iowa, it's perfect deer habitat. There's a number of TV shows that are filmed in this area. There's a lot of those big buck hunters are there. And that one's still 28% woodland. Jefferson County, Kansas, which is a little bit west of the Kansas City area, you're 20% woodland. And you can see the topography pop up with just the shapes of all of those. Lots of places for bucks to hide to gain some age. You move to Butler County, Kansas, south central Kansas. You're down to 6% woodland, but you can still see all the drainages with timber and just all that topography, places for deer to hide. Probably our best county habitat wise in the state, you're looking at Pawnee County, 12% woodland. You can see all that timber and a lot of place there for deer to hide, a lot of grassland. Grassland's an important fawn cover. Bed sites, it plays an important role for deer. Another place is Howard County, Nebraska. I believe Howard County has the third highest buck harvest in the state for whitetails. And you can see those river corridors, but that's, you know, outside of a few pockets of timber and some drainages, most of your whitetail habitat is along those loop rivers. And then, you know, you see there you're down to 4% woodland cover. Then you look at Saunders County, 73% crop, 4% woodland, and only 16% grassland. As that cropland starts to chew away at the habitat, you start losing some of your productivity. Pawnee County is a good example. You know, it's not only what you start with or what you have, but how things change over time. This is a picture of the habitat in Pawnee County in the early 2000s. I don't know the exact date, but we're guessing either, you know, real late 90s or early 2000s. So At this point in time, it was 18% agriculture and 75% woodland grassland. By 2008, it was 29% crop. And then what's that add to? Add up to 67% woodland grassland. And then by 2018, it's 43% cropland, and almost all of that has come out of the grassland component. But if you flip back and forth, you can see how that changed. Well, deer do like beans and corn. It doesn't provide annual habitat for them, and those herds will suffer if you lose too much of that. And the deer harvest down in Pawnee County has declined over that period as well. So yeah, there's a whole host of things that play roles in what an area can produce and provide for deer numbers. The other question is why don't we move our season to December? As you can see, of most of the Midwest states, basically you have Iowa, Kansas, and Ohio that hunt in December. Everybody else is basically in November, mid-November, kind of where we're at. And so, why do we have it in November? A lot of it comes down to tradition. It's where it's been. That's not to say we'd never change it. That would take work with a lot of work, with all of our hunters, with landowners, trying to figure out where it is that they would want it to be. November is arguably the best time to hunt deer. It's the most fun. The bucks are moving. There's a reason everybody wants to hunt in November. It's a ton of fun to be out there when that's all going on. It's better weather than it would be in December. December tends to be colder. Not that it can't be cold in November. We've had some cold snaps, but it's more often than not, you're going to have cold stretches in December, which can drastically impact the deer harvest, people wanting to go out. It's just, we're getting youth involved. It's hard to get youth to sit still when it's moderately cold. When it's really cold, it gets really tough. So that's part of it. You could also argue that it's probably safer to have it in November. The deer are moving, so the hunters don't have to. A lot of other states where they have deer seasons in December, one of the main tactics to get deer moving is to push them to use blockers. And by doing that, you put deer hunters out in front of guns. You put people in compromising situations. So there's a lot of things that run into that. And like I said, it's not that we'd never change that. That's never set in stone, but it would take a lot of working together to get that to move. It's not something we'd ever change on a whim. The other question we get is antler restrictions. For the most part, antler restrictions are used to protect yearling bucks. There really aren't any antler metrics that you can use to protect anything older than yearlings. Yeah, beyond that, it gets really tough to age deer. There's a lot in states that have antler point restrictions. There's a lot of mistakes that happen just in those restrictions. The details get a lot more minute. I guess you got to pay a lot closer attention. And in some places, some things you can't discern a 2-year-old from a 3-year-old on the hoof from very far away at all. And research has also shown that antler point restrictions don't really increase the number of mature bucks. It might increase the number of yearling bucks that year, but by and large, most of those bucks disperse, as well as they've got a poor survival over the winter and poor survival to the next year. Really, all that antler point restrictions do is just place the harvest on that next older age class. Basically, you're just shooting more 2-year-olds. We could also argue here in Nebraska that we don't really need it. You hunters have been doing a great job of policing yourselves. You can see the change from in that blue line from 2004 to now. I mean, our mule deer harvest the buck harvest comprised of almost 50% yearling bucks in 2004. In the last 15 years, it's down to 11% this year, which is the best we've ever had. And over that same time, those 3.5 and older, they've all increased. The whitetail buck, we've seen a similar trend. We were above 50% in like 1990. That was over 70% yearling buck harvest. We're down this year. We're like at 22%. You can see those fluctuations in that 2012 to 2013 range. A lot of that had to do with the hemorrhagic disease event that severely impacted our whitetails. So in that yearling buck harvest, you can see the comparison with some of these other states. This is some more info that came from the QDMA report. Iowa, Kansas, Minnesota, North Dakota, South Dakota didn't report, but you can see where we rank. In this year, we were 27%. Indiana was 26. Kentucky, I believe, was 24. Oklahoma was 19, I believe. But Kentucky, I believe, has got antler point restrictions. And so they, even with antler point restrictions, they get a little bit better than us. Michigan has APR and Pennsylvania, and they're up in the 40s still. So you're still, even with antler point restrictions, you're still going to kill yearling bucks. And that's, you know, like we demonstrated with the slide before, we don't necessarily need to protect yearling bucks, because you guys are doing a pretty good job. And if somebody wants to shoot a yearling buck and that's what they've what makes them happy and they want to take it home, then good for them. That's what we want. We don't want to police what is a trophy and what isn't a trophy for hunters. The other question is, why do we have 2 buck permits? For one, it provides a lot of opportunity for hunters to take a buck and keep hunting. The other side of it, it has a relatively low impact. Only about 20% of our residents and 10% of our non-residents purchased 2 buck permits in 2019. 14% of those residents and 29% of those non-residents actually killed 2 bucks, which that means a total of 2.9% of all resident hunters and 3.4% of all non-resident buck hunters actually killed 2 bucks. This equates to a little over 2,500 additional bucks killed, which is about 7% of our buck harvest. Or if you want to think on a spatial scale, that's 0.03 bucks per square mile, additional bucks that we're taking. So if we got rid of that, it would have a little impact, but I'm not sure that anybody would really notice it. So we harvest a few more bucks because of it, but it's in that it is a matter of the trade-off of providing that opportunity versus trying to manage for quality. Another question we get is our shed buck harvest due to our late season. This is looking at some 2018 data. In Iowa, about 1.4% of their buck harvest is shed bucks. Kansas is 1.9. With ours, I've done some looking at this. The very worst case scenario, we'd be at 1.7. But I think we're far below that. For one, it's counting that would be counting all of those. It's all of the adult bucks taken on season choice permits, which you got to remember, spikes that are 6 inches and less qualify as antlerless on those permits. And so 156 of those deer that were taken on those permits were in November. We know none of those were shed. It's likely that a high percentage of those adult bucks that get shot on those season choice permits are spikes. I would estimate that we're probably right around that 1%. So that's something that would change. That number would definitely go up if we had a firearm season in December. So that's just one of the points where we actually do pretty good. You hunters do a pretty good job of avoiding those shed bucks during the late season. So I guess, looking at if we'd move our season, what's to be gained, we might gain a little bit of age structure, not a lot. Access, if we did impact that age structure, access would change. In states like Kansas and Iowa, knocking on doors and gaining permission is really difficult. It can still be done. It's difficult to do in Nebraska, increasingly difficult. Leasing is more common than it used to be. But these states where, especially in areas where there's trophy deer, the access really goes out the window. It becomes really difficult for the local guys. Typically, it's the local guys that get squeezed out of those areas. If we moved it to December, it would make, hunter recruitment a little more difficult, like I mentioned with the youth, as well as, law enforcement issues. You could argue that poaching and trespassing could increase, especially if you do impact, if you manage for more trophies. Trespassing definitely increases. Or if you move the season to December with it being colder, you're close your computer. Technical difficulties again.
Another mouse.
Yeah, another mouse. But yeah, with it being colder, you're likely to push more hunters into road hunting. So like I said, not that we wouldn't want to, but there's a whole lot of things that we'd want to weigh before we ever did that. And so I guess that comes kind of to the end of our prepared questions that we had. Hopefully I hit those well enough. If you've got any more questions that have popped up, we'll try to address those now. You can either, like I mentioned before, you can comment below. You can hit us on the contact us part of our website, or you can like and follow on social media.
I'd just like to take a moment to thank the landowners in Nebraska. You know, Luke mentioned that Nebraska is 97% privately owned, and without landowners, which includes farmers, ranchers, all landowners out there, our big game management doesn't go forward. So with that, we are ready for questions. Some of you have been sending in questions for a few days, and some, we're not going to get to all of them tonight, and we'll get your responses via email. And we've have answered some of those, and hopefully Luke's slides were intended to answer a lot of common questions that we get. But yeah, we'll start looking over questions, I guess, and go from there.
Yeah, and if you've got any unit specific questions, you can sure ask, and we'll try to get to them. But yeah, anything that you comment or any questions you ask, whether it was been through the email, I'll try to get back to you. There's some of you I've already gotten back to, and answered some questions. They're not popping up on mine. Oh, on the side. Fancy YouTube. There they are. I was looking below. All right. Let's see. Yeah, there's one question about landowner antlerless. Actually, all of our landowner permits come with a bonus antlerless permit on them. Let's see. Yeah, let's see.
Question about the elk depredation permit, which we had a slide on that.
Yeah, and if there's anything, yeah, like that, if you're just joining us and you missed some things, you might go back through the elk depredation we covered pretty early on. This question about CWD can and will spread to cattle. There's never been any evidence that they can that it can spread to cattle naturally. I think they've done some really extreme stuff, injecting the prion into the brain, and had been able to replicate it that way, but they've never documented it to be transmissible to cattle in any natural way. How do we gauge the success of the mule deer restricted areas? Are the plans to allow mule deer? Yeah, mule deer does in these areas. I'd say the success of our MDCA has done quite well. It's our mule deer buck harvest has increased. This last year, we've actually significantly increased our doe harvest in all of those units, particularly the Frenchman West. Those permits have gone up
for a number of years.
Yeah, probably sixfold, I think, over the last five or 6 years.
Right.
So we've increased harvest there. The Platte has increased a lot, as well as we've also got some mule deer doe harvest in the northwest part of the Buffalo unit.
We got a question about the Elkhorn unit. We didn't have unit specific slides up here, but where are the numbers? My unit, yeah.
What if you want to take some time and look at that? And the person can answer any other question.
Yeah, I can pull up some of those numbers from the Elkhorn.
Okay.
Um,
And we got to thank you on there. We get a lot of positive comments about these meetings, and that's why we started having them again about 12 years ago. The Board of Commissioners, actually, members at that time recommended that we go out into the communities and talk to our hunters and landowners and general public, and they've been pretty successful. We've got a lot of, again, positive feedback over the years. And I mentioned at the beginning of the presentation that all comments, questions, suggestions will be put into notes, and they'll be forwarded to our administration up through our director, and our Board of Commissioners will see all those. I'm sorry, I can't hear you. So, and do you have the Elkhorn? There's a question about the Elkhorn unit. I don't know that we can put that slide up there.
yeah,
Oh, yeah, go ahead.
I was gonna say, yeah, we can't make stuff cross that way. The Elkhorn whitetail buck harvest increased about 10% from last year. So
If you're in that Elkhorn unit, you said you had trouble at the meeting, call the Norfolk office and he can get you some more information. Lucas Nagus, ask for somebody in wildlife there, and he can go through the harvest of the Elkhorn unit a little more in depth. But yeah, I got a note here, a reminder. I did mention that our primary sources of information on big game management come from landowners and hunters, and we're getting ready to do a landowner survey. So we ask you, if you get that survey via email or mail, please participate. That's valuable information. We had real good participation last time. It's been a number of years, and that should come out, we're hoping, this year. And then also the hunter survey we try to do them every 5 years roughly. And so we're getting ready to put both of those out this year. And like I said, we encourage you to answer that survey via email, or again, snail mail, however you get it, because that information is formulated, and we do take a hard look at that and just see. And that kind of, you talk about moving the season or lengthening the season, things like that. That does give us a good idea what the entire population of landowners is saying, what the entire cumulative number of hunters, what they're all thinking. So kind of puts everybody together, and we're able to look at that data across the entire state.
Yeah.
So some more questions.
Yeah, so one of the questions is, do we have the dates of when we can start to apply for antelope tags? That stuff hasn't been approved yet, but based upon the schedule that we have every year, I believe that it'll start June 8th. I think it's like June 8th to the 26th, I think is the weeks that should fall. But it'll be right in that middle of June. Just when our big game guide comes out here towards the 1st of May, look for it. Look for that. It'll be sometime in that early to mid June is when that'll be open.
We take input and look at harvest data as biologists in the wildlife division, and then we meet and discuss as together as a state committee within wildlife, and then we make recommendations to our staff, our supervisors, on up through our deputy director and director, and then at our March commission meeting is when they make final decisions based on what we recommend. So,
okay, yeah. So that regulation when that application period starts is the second Monday in June. So this year would be the 8th. Yeah, one of the questions we received via email this morning was somebody asking about they like our OFW program, but we're wondering if we ever had looked into anything like Wyoming's hunter management area program, where you get a few people, or it's a limited number of limited amount of access, whether we get more landowners to sign up for that. It's definitely one of the things we've looked at. I don't know if we've explored it real deeply, but yeah, that's definitely an idea to try to get more public access. Let's see.
We had a few, I see more than couple price questions on permits. We got the big game guide here. I don't know. I don't remember what specifically they're asking about youth permits, I think.
Oh,
But youth whitetail, $8 for residents and non-residents, youth, $8. So I think that was a question earlier. And what else we got? Sorry, I can barely see him. I'm leaning over Luke here. That's fine. I can see him. Don't move it.
update on mountain lion numbers.
Oh, yeah. Okay.
Yeah, that stuff, Sam's in the process of getting that all figured out.
Sam's our fur
Yeah.
bearer specialist.
Yep,
within the game
that's all,
part. Sam
it's all under
Wilson.
his program, so I don't have much to do with that, unfortunately. So I don't really have an answer for you. I guess just stay tuned, and there will be information on that coming out here soon. I know that people are definitely interested in that.
Harvest is at 2 still? 2.
Yeah, still 2, both in the south unit.
Both in the south unit,
Yeah,
2
male.
mountain lions,
Male
one
and a
female,
female.
one male.
Yep.
Currently. That information is also on our webpage, outdoornebraska.gov.
Yep. Gov or org will take you
org.
there.
Okay.
I think they both
Yeah.
take you to Gov. Is there something else? Oh, any turkey info. Yeah, technically that does fall under big game, and I didn't include any of that. I probably should have. I can look some of that up and tell you. Yeah, it's you actually, yeah, there's a lot of our harvest information that's on that outdoornebraska.gov/wild turkey. There's a lot of info there on turkeys. Our harvest has been fairly stable. We've declined a little bit, over the past 5 or 7 years. We're not alone in that. Actually, it's a kind of a nationwide phenomenon right now that most states are dealing with turkey population as well as turkey harvest declines. We've probably fared the best, or one of the best out of that, or declined the least. We've definitely seen some declines. Some of that, I think, for us can be attributed to some wet springs. Wet nesting conditions are really hard on both the nests as well as the poults, and we've had some poor years. Like in my presentation with the habitat changes in Pawnee County, that's definitely played a role. There's less places for turkeys to nest and rear broods. That brood rearing habitat is really important. Good buggy places, and with the much cleaner farming practices, just the landscape has changed, and it's not quite as productive for turkeys. Some of it too with turkeys is that when we had really high numbers, there's a lot of habitats that were real marginal habitat for wild turkeys that they had found and were utilizing. And as those numbers have shrunk back, the areas with good habitat have typically seen numbers remain fairly strong. I know the Pine Ridge and the Panhandle is still doing pretty good with turkey numbers. They probably don't want me to tell you that over the air here. But there's a lot of country out there that's still seeing decent numbers. But there's some areas where that habitat was, kind of right on the fringe, where we had a stretch there where turkeys were popping up everywhere, and those turkeys have kind of retracted to some of the higher quality habitat, I guess I'll say. Is there anything else that's... Oh, yeah, we on our website, we've produced some trip planners to help with any information on both turkey hunting, deer hunting. I think they've even got a couple different upland game ones that they've done. Okay, there's 2 separate ones for turkeys. That's right. There's one for the Pine Ridge Panhandle, and the other one's the Southwest. Yeah. And so there's a lot of good information there to help you just plan your trip on what else you can do while you're out there, or what else you should plan for when you're getting that trip planned out.
Is there a question about the 50 elk tag that we didn't
Yep.
cover?
No, they do.
Oh, they submitted
okay.
a question.
Okay.
Yeah, if you go back, it's probably 20 minutes in, 10 minutes in, we covered that pretty early on.
Yeah, about 20 minutes probably.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, yeah, there might be a few things that you want to go back through and watch the first hour. You can pick up some information on deer harvest, trophy management in Nebraska, where we sit among the other states when you compare us and all that. Oh, yeah, that's right. We had a couple of questions on email that just popped in. One of them was asking, have we ever considered extending our river antler season to the end of January? That's something that we look at, and a lot of the reasons that it stops the 15th is just for one, we for the most part get enough harvest. About 40% of, particularly on that river antlerless permit, about 40% of our harvest comes from just those 15 days in January. And so I don't know if we necessarily need a lot more harvest in a lot of those areas. There's some pockets where there's too many whitetails along the rivers, but we do pretty good with that permit. Part of it is the long seasons, working with our landowner surveys, like Pat mentioned. They prefer those seasons. Landowners typically prefer those seasons to be as short and concise as possible. So we try to respect those wishes in that. I don't know. You think of any other reasons why that's?
No, well, we've had it to go to the end of January in the past when, we had the high deer numbers of 2008, 9, 10, those years before 2012. And there's many years we did go to the end of January. And then this year, in a couple of units, Loop East and Frenchman, we are allowing those seasons to go later, just to pick up more harvest.
But another comment from Gary about increasing the elk permits, and I would anticipate that's one of the things that we'll definitely be looking at next week with everything that's gone on, and working with the landowners. I would anticipate that we'll see an increase in our elk permits for 2020,
Likely
next
yeah.
year.
Read it. I don't know if we'll be able to answer
Yeah.
it. I don't know if we want to answer it, but
Question from Bill. It's a good one, and that's why we're
Yes,
chuckling.
it's a very good answer.
If you had
Question.
one thing you could change in the way that the state's deer are managed, what would it be? And he says, thanks for the work you do.
yeah, Bill, good question.
Yeah, that's a really
But,
good one.
I mean, we have answers, but
Yeah.
our boss is sitting across the table, so I'm not sure we want to answer it.
It's for me, and maybe it's a little bit of a scapegoat because I'm early into my position. I've been in my job 14 months now, or almost 14 months. And if you would ask me this 3 or 4 years ago, that the answer would be entirely different. I probably would have definitely leaned more in that trophy management side. As I've seen and spent more time working with a lot of the state over the last couple of years, and then being in my position this year, I really think we have it pretty good because the way our seasons are set up, it gives a lot of freedom for not only our landowners but the hunters to pursue what they want. And landowners, land managers to have the number of deer that they want on their land. For the most part, there's a few areas where we have limited the amount of mule deer harvest, but on whitetails, you can have as many or as few a deer on your ground as you want, providing you don't have some neighbor issues going on that complicate that. But so for the most part, I think, whether it's by accident or on purpose, I think our deer seasons are set up pretty good. I'm pretty happy with how things are. Obviously, I wish we had more control over being able to help landowners that are dealing with depredation, which in situations that may not be their fault. I wish there was something that we could do to help them solve those problems. Other than that, when it comes down to some of the season structure, I don't know that there's a lot that I would personally change. That's probably a cop out.
No, I don't know. I mean, it comes down to communication as a public servant. That is frustrating that, we maybe we get the word out, but there's still a lot of people that don't understand. Again, I showed those graphs earlier in the presentation, how many inputs and how many people have opinions on deer season, setting, bag limits, and all that. But back to our, age structure, Nebraska is an opportunity state. And Luke mentioned it, that a lot of young biologists, and I was there too, you come in and you think, we should manage on the trophy side, but that sometimes and often involves sitting hunters home, and I come from where I've hunted with my family and I hunt with my daughters now. And so we don't want people to sit home. And so we err on opportunity and getting people out there. And I should mention a state, Oklahoma, and I mention other states. We talk about them and we steal from them. They steal from us. Good ideas. And that's the way it should be. But I don't know where their buck age structure is now, but last I looked at it, and this has been a few years, they had one of the better age structures in the nation. And it was strictly voluntary. They didn't have point restrictions, some of that stuff, but they had a slogan that they had, hunters in the know, let them grow. And, and that basically means pass on the 1.5-year buck, pass on the small buck. I always tell hunters and landowners, if you're not going to mount that trophy buck, if you're not going to put it on your wall and spend $500 to put it on your wall, because it's not bigger than the one you already have on your wall, and pass it up and shoot a doe if you need fewer deer, or let the younger bucks grow up. And that program is played out in Oklahoma. They promoted it hard, and it killed a lot of antlerless deer where they needed them killed, and it allowed their age structure to grow. Again, I haven't checked it in a few years. I don't know where they're at now, but for a number of years they had a pretty good age structure. So, but I'm with Luke. I don't know that I would change much. I just the communication thing. I wish there was a way to I think I wish you could sit in our offices every day and go through everything piece by piece. There's a lot to it, and this is going to sound like a cop out, but we have 1.8 million people, probably beyond that, because of non-residents we're trying to make happy. I always say I have 1 or 2 million now in Nebraska, 2 million bosses. So if there was a way just to bring us all together, but
yeah. And I totally agree with that. I wish we had more participation. I'm looking at this. Right now we've got 81 people watching us live. I wish that was 8,000.
Right.
I wish we had a lot more participation. And hopefully, we'll be trying to do more of these types of things in the future. I think this has gone pretty well for us so far. And so yeah.
I'll get the sheep question answered, but go ahead and move on to the
Okay. Yeah, there's a couple questions here. Xavier had a question about rifle season in December. If when we're all done, if you go back to probably 20 to 30 minutes in, I've got a pretty long segment of the previous presentation that talks about all of those things.
sheep.
I'll get that in a second.
She's going to talk about sheep. Statewide white. Oh, the statewide whitetail buck. The reason that we don't allow doe harvest on that is because there's units where we may not want more doe harvest, and those statewide permits are somewhat unpredictable. That would be nice to allow the harvest of a doe on that. And it's a good comment. There's definitely some things that we need to examine with some of those statewide permits. And so, yeah, we'll definitely, we'll take a look at it. And like we've mentioned before, everything, all the comments you guys are putting up, everything is, will get recorded, written down, and be submitted to our staff, administration, and commissioners. And it'll all go, things that we'll look at. Oh.
Yeah, we mentioned that earlier. HHH program, Hunters Helping the Hungry. We have that. You can donate deer meat to processors throughout the state of Nebraska. If you have a deer you don't want. They grind it for hamburger and give it to those in need. So, no, go ahead.
Brian had a question. How do the state's current antelope and elk populations compare to overall objectives? I would say we're kind of right in that window. We're kind of right in that window where we're finding out we're probably over objectives. The landowners are letting us know on those. There's a whole host of things that play into what that tolerance is. You know, last year with the hard winter, that pushed a lot of antelope into places where they weren't wanted and caused a lot of depredation issues. We're not seeing quite as much this year, so hopefully they stay off the wheat and rye fields. Elk, yeah, we've got some places where we're over tolerance. There's places where elk are continuing to expand in numbers. Across the eastern part, we have elk popping up in, you know, the Burwell area and the Central S Hills, and farther east down the Niobrara River Valley. But that's one thing where we found out that where elk meet that corn interface, that tolerance goes down. So that's we've got to be very cognizant of that, and try to stay on top of our elk and be fairly aggressive with our cow permits and try to get elk harvest and keep those numbers in check.
Social tolerance for all these big game species plays heavy into management. You know, biologically, we could have a lot more of these critters on the landscape, but you know, it'd be tough in some places for row crop farmers to make profit. But so yeah, agriculture is $1 billion industry in the state of Nebraska. So we listen very keenly to landowners. I see Dave C. read my mind here. He said 81 people now, but many people will view this tonight and going forward. And that is true. We've done this social media before, and it gets into the thousands. So we realize, and thank you for all tuning in and tonight. But yeah, we realize that this will be very helpful to others as they view this in the future.
Yeah. Yeah. And Dave, we appreciate those comments. What else have we got on? It's one of the questions we had. One of the questions we had through the email we received this morning was asking about increasing to allow 3 buck permits, which we don't get many of those. Usually it's to go the other way to knock us back down to 1. So 2 seems to be a pretty happy place for us with the situation where we're at. And also said some states have an expanded rifle season across several weeks. Are there thoughts of expanding the rifle deer season to 2 weeks or more? Not really. We kind of along the same lines with that antlerless season. Those long deer seasons are hard on our landowners, and we want to be respectful. It's also, you know, those longer seasons are hard on our deer. We don't necessarily need to increase our deer harvest. If we made our seasons longer, we'd probably have to consider cutting permits just because of the increased harvest.
We had this question in one of our meetings, and you actually covered it earlier, but expanding the rifle season, like Luke mentioned earlier, we are cognizant of what our landowners will tolerate as far as the length of our seasons. And that's why I urge you, if you're a landowner, to participate, hunter, participate in any survey you get from us. But the surveys in the past have told us that 9 days is kind of basically landowners want to be done with it after 9 days, but that could change. Again, we listen and look at those surveys, and that helps guide those decisions moving forward.
Yeah. And I guess to touch on the surveys that are coming out, yeah, we'll have that landowner survey. That'll be a mail survey, and we're working with the University of Nebraska on that. And there'll be a sample. Not every landowner is going to get a survey. It'll be a subsample of our landowners in each unit. I believe we're going to do at least 2 different, one regarding elk, surveying our elk units, and then one in our deer units, which will be in conjunction. I think, aren't we doing the antelope and deer at the same time? Or they might be 2 separate surveys going to different groups of people. Anyway, there's going to be subsamples of the landowners. So if you don't receive a survey, hopefully we'll catch you next time. But if you do receive a survey, please help us out and participate in that. We're also going to look at doing a hunter survey here, hopefully this spring, as soon as we get the landowner survey out. We'll be sending surveys out to our hunters, getting their opinion on a whole host of things. All right.
Do you want some of the sheep stuff?
Sure. What do you got? All right. Yeah, we had a question on how the sheep are doing out west. So I'll read some information here that we're getting from staff. The Pine Ridge sheep are doing the best. Survival, or doing
Better.
better. Will, your grammar's terrible. Pine Ridge sheep are doing better. Survival was the highest it's been in 10 years. We've taken some steps to remove what we refer to as the chronic shedders. They've been dealing with some pneumonia issues, and there's some research out of South Dakota that says if you remove some of these sheep that tend to continue to be sick and not die of it, that if you remove them from the herd, that you'll see increased survival, particularly among your lambs. I'm kind of butchering the science of that, but that's the gist of it. Wildcat hill sheep have been growing steadily the last couple years. We had over 73 lambs observed in that herd in the Wildcat Hills this past summer. So the Wildcat Hills are doing really well. And this other note here says, well, the Pine Ridge unit or Pine Ridge sheep are doing better. They've still got some got an uphill road to climb with the disease issues and the low numbers that they've had, but things are looking better currently. So hopefully we keep increasing, keep doing better.
Yeah, we get a number of questions or comments, I guess, about price of our permits, and they go both ways. We're not often
yeah.
We'll get comments that we don't charge enough for non-residents, and then others will say, well, you're pricing me out of hunting. And it goes back to that one slide, how our price is set. And it starts with statute gives us a range that we can charge for a lot of our permits, and then we incrementally increase those, and we have decreased like antlerless permits, and that's hence the reason youth permits are low cost, and river antlerless youth is for recruitment, and river antlerless is to encourage antlerless harvest along the river corridors where we have most of our problems with white-tailed deer. But yeah, it goes both ways. We're either charging too much or not enough. And I would just say that, our as biologists, we don't base our decisions and our recommendations on price or money. I know we're often accused of that, or think we do it that way, but that's not how it's done. But
yeah, and on that, the big one that gets talked about a lot is that non-resident deer permit.
Right.
Currently we're at 242. I believe statutorily we can go up to 280, it's either 282 or 278. I can't remember, but it's right in that ballpark. So there's some range where we could go up. But yeah, like Pat said, we get a number of comments of people that price is actually too much. With family and friends wanting to come back to Nebraska that, we're either one-time residents or want their friends to be able to come here, hunt their ground, and think that that's too much for us to charge for those permits. And so, like a lot of things we do, it's a balancing act of making sure it's in that area that's kind of the sweet spot, that we're trying to hit with a lot of what we do. And so, yeah, there's a lot of balancing that goes into all of our management decisions and recommendations. Is there anything popped up on the Facebook questions? Okay. A couple questions that came through the Facebook Messenger. Will Game Park sell a doe tag for archery that I can use in different parts of the state? Yeah, we used to have that bonus tag on the archery permit. The reason that we don't have that is we've still got a few parts of the state, particularly the eastern, the southeast part, where we don't want any additional doe harvest. And adding those permits or adding that bonus tag to that permit would definitely increase our doe harvest down in the southeast part of the state. Yeah, the archery permits get used quite extensively in the Wahoo and Blue Northwest.
The second part of that, or were you done?
No.
Okay. The second part of that is we make it easy for poachers in Nebraska because it can print off multiple permits because you can get your permits online. I don't know. I have trouble with this one. Since we've implemented buying your permit online, we've sold a record number of permits. And I guess, back when we had a printed permit that you had to get from the Game and Parks Commissioner, we mailed it out. There still could be abuses by that. I mean, I guess what I'm trying to say, a poacher is a poacher, and they're going to find a way to cheat the system if they can. But that's why we have a law enforcement division. Breaking the law is still breaking the law, and we catch those people and we still write citations. And one thing about an electronic permitting system and being able to get them online, it's able to search data pretty good for us both ways, permits and harvest. So law enforcement, in my opinion, is in some ways become easier to enforce or better to investigate. So I don't know. I mean, I know that's a common, in my opinion, misconception that poaching has gone up. I think the poachers were poachers under all both systems. So
Yeah, and I think with the paper permit, to take it home and not get caught, you could essentially do that with the
With
old
the old
permit
system,
too.
yeah.
I mean,
not cancel your
Yeah,
tag.
not
Both have
cancel
a
your permit.
cancellation carcass tag, and it's illegal not to do that immediately upon your harvest. So
yeah, and technically it's illegal to duplicate your permit.
yes, it's
So,
illegal to duplicate your permit.
Yeah, so don't be making copies in case you lose one.
Right.
So
And we don't have an electronic form of the deer permit yet. So bring
Yeah.
your paper copy to the check station
Yeah.
during the 9-day November firearm.
Yep. Make sure you sign it when you purchase it, and then make sure you punch it when you kill something.
Yeah.
Those are the two biggest things that we see.
And have a habitat stamp if you're
habitat stamp's
required
the other
to.
one.
Landowners don't have to, but
Yeah, everybody else
and under
needs a habitat stamp.
16, but everyone else needs a habitat stamps. Just some common things we see at the check stations. Outside the 9-day November firearm, right, most people are aware we have a telecheck and internet check of harvested deer. Any more? Are we? All right, I think we're going to wrap things up
Oh,
here.
there's one more. That just,
So, oh, you got one more. Yeah, going once. All right, going twice. No, again, thank you for tuning in. Thanks for all the comments. Yeah, there's a lot of ways to get a hold of us. District offices through our website, outdoornebraska.org.gov. You can look up our email, call us, call the switchboard, ask for Luke or Pat, call the district offices. Yeah, I said Luke first.
Yeah,
It doesn't
I
matter.
noticed that.
Call us. We will discuss that at any time.
Yeah.
We'll tell you what we know. I always try to be transparent in everything I do. I have nothing to hide. So with that, I think we'll end our broadcast.
Yeah. No, thanks for joining us. And like we've mentioned before, if there's any questions that pop up, we'll try to answer them directly, and you can hit us through if you look on the screen there, through the contact us, send us emails, call us, like Pat mentioned, we'll get to you.
Thanks.
So thanks for watching.